I'm Katie White, and this is By the Book, Enhancing Relationships Through Literature. Our mission here at By the Book is to connect people with books that foster personal growth and strengthen relationships with family and friends. We believe the best relationship advice is already out there, and we're here to help you discover it. Today we have Dr. Tim Rarick with us. Dr. Rarick is one of my professors here at BYU Idaho and is a dear friend of mine as well. He has graciously agreed to be on the podcast. I took a Child and Family Advocacy class with Dr. Rarick here on campus last spring, and it was my favorite class I've ever taken. Changed my life, blessed me in so many ways. I still think about it all the time. And I actually have the privilege of going on a school-sponsored trip with him and some other students to the United Nations in New York that is coming up in March, and I'm beyond excited for that. Before we get going, I just want to introduce him a little bit more. Dr. Rarick received his bachelor's degree in Human Development and Family Studies at the University of Utah in 2006, his master's degree in Marriage, Family, and Human Development from Kansas State University in 2008, and a PhD in Human Development and Family Studies also from Kansas State in 2011. He has been an instructor at multiple universities across the U.S. He's participated in research. He's a writer. He works with many nonprofits and is currently the chairman of the board of the Idaho State Department of Health and Welfare. Dr. Rarick is also very musically talented. He's been a part of a boy band. He loves tennis. He coaches his daughter's high school team and is very involved in his community. So without further ado, here is Dr. Rarick. Thank you so much for being with us today. I'm so excited to talk to you and hear about the book that you chose to talk with us about.
Sure you don't want to talk about the boy band?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some pictures. It looked like you were in your glory days back there.
Although people compare me to Niall Horn. I'm just kidding.
I went and saw his concert this summer.
Did you really?
It was so awesome. Yeah, 10 out of 10 recommend.
Well, I was going to say Harry Styles, probably more like. No, it wasn't a boy band, although that's pretty funny.
Yeah.
It was a rock band.
A rock band.
Yeah, I'm not.
A rock band.
I'm not adorable enough to be in a boy band.
Okay, well, we love the boy band days, but let's talk about the book that you chose to talk to us. Which one did you choose, and why did you choose it?
I picked Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
Okay.
Dr. Viktor Frankl. I picked it. I'm a big fan of paradigm-shifting books, and this is one of those. I mean, it was written a long time ago. In fact, I don't even remember what year it was written. But I don't even remember how I found the book. I wish I could remember, but it was a paradigm shifter for me, and I know it has been for millions of people.
Yeah.
And Viktor Frankl was a Jewish man in Auschwitz in World War II, which is a Nazi concentration camp. And he was in other concentration camps and survived. Astonishingly, if you read the book, he was part of a small percentage of Jews who survived those camps.
Yeah.
And his story and what he derived from that story and his experiences is, I think, the most powerful. So, that's why I picked it, because I think there's a lot of relevance for our personal lives and for especially our family relationships.
Yeah. This was one of the first books that I ever read that, like you kind of were saying, was a paradigm shift book for me. I think I read it when I was like 11 or 12 for the first time, and it definitely changed how I saw the world and how I thought. So I'm really excited to hear your thoughts about it today. You kind of touched on the author. Is there anything else that you'd want to say about Viktor Frankl?
Well, reading the book, you find out he's married before he enters the concentration camps and the Nazis. He and his wife entered different concentration camps. He's not even sure where she is. He was also a psychiatrist before, and he did a lot of work pro bono, because one of the Nazi guards, so if you read the book, I read it a couple times, and maybe 2 or 3 times, and the first time I couldn't quite sort out the difference between the capo and the SS guard. And SS are the Nazis. Capos are other Jews who are put to be over, a group of people in the concentration camp. And I can't remember if he was talking with a capo or an SS guard, but one of them asked, "What did you do before this?" And he says, "I was a doctor." And the man immediately assumed that he was posh and had made a lot of money and wealthy, and he quickly said, "No, actually, I did a lot of stuff pro bono, and tried to keep it cheap because he did a lot of humanitarian and service for the community and for people." And the guard did not like that. And I have a theory for why, and we can talk about that later. But he beat on him once he told him that. You'd think he'd be like, "Oh, what a good man." Actually, I'll just tell you my theory right now.
Okay, let's hear it.
I think it's because these people were in such a hardened state, the capos and the SS, the Nazi guards, that anytime somebody says something or does something to obliterate the narrative they already have about these people who you see as a bunch of objects below cattle, then that ticks you off. You can either soften at that point and be like, "Oh, maybe I should change my heart or my narrative," or you can be angrier. And I think he just got angrier because like, how dare you try to humanize yourself when you're not human? Oh, wow. And I don't even think they're cognitively thinking that. I think that's just like an unconscious thing that people do. And so
this is making me want to read the book again.
Yeah, and so as I've reread it again recently, I started thinking of so many things I never noticed the first or second time, and that was one. I thought, why did he get so angry? Oh, it's because he has to continue to stay justified that he's in the right and the other guy's in the wrong. That he's a person, but Viktor Frankl is not, and they're just a bunch of. In fact, the term they use all the time is pigs. They call them pigs. So, and you think of pigs, swine is one of the insults because they roll around the mud, they eat slop. They're just, to a lot of humans, they're a gross animal. So you had not just pick an animal, which is below humans, it's some of the worst animals out there. Right. So yeah, I noticed that, and a lot of other things stick out to me. But yeah, he was an intelligent man, but he was beyond that because intelligence alone doesn't equate maturity or character. And I've learned that being in academia, people I've met throughout the world who are academics that lacked character, but were very intellectual. Yeah.
I just remember, it's been a while since I've read the book, but I just remember being so impressed with how he was able to stick with his morals and his virtues and like stay human and kind and like looking for the positive throughout his entire experience. So it definitely inspired me to, if he can do that in the worst of the situations really you could probably ever be in, that I don't really have an excuse, like when I'm just frustrated with somebody in my posh first world life.
Or somebody cuts you off in traffic, or you've got right now I have a pretty short commute as far as miles. I think it's about a mile from my house to my office. And some mornings I can get really frustrated that there's a bunch of NPCs, non-playable characters. That's a term, and for those of you who are listening, that's a video game term where they create characters within video games that you talk to or you interact with, but they're just programmed to respond in particular ways. They really don't have any autonomy.
Yeah, no personality.
They can't react. Independent. There's no independent thought. We'll just put it that way.
Right.
So it's easy to see other people on my small commute who are going super slow, and I want to get to class or to meet with the student as NPCs, and I get frustrated, and it's easy to feel like my emotions are chosen for me by these people. Right. And I could be happy or I could be calm if it wasn't for these people. And the way you said it, Katie, was exactly right. Every time I listen or read the book, I think to myself, you can't get worse than this. Your circumstances, your environment cannot get worse than this. They were stripped away from everything. Literally, there's some episodes in the book where they're buck naked. They don't have any fat or muscle on their body. And he says at one point that you had to find a piece of glass to shave your face because it made you, the guards were constantly selecting who should die, and that was primarily done who was old and sick and useless, who wasn't being able to help with all because they're labor camps.
Right.
And I mean, just from a practical perspective, as I'm listening to the book, I'm going, this is a terrible way to get things done. Like, if you want to really be productive and have these labor camps produce something, how about you starve them? How about you beat them? They're not going to, you have really weak employees. Obviously, the point wasn't to really produce, it was to make people suffer. But he realized, Dr. Frankl realized that if you shave, not only do you look younger, but your cheeks get red and ruddy, and that makes you look younger too. So it's another way of surviving. But they were stripped of everything.
Right.
And so why do I complain about the things that are in my life? And I can talk about that in a second, why I think we do that. There was something else that you said about the book, just barely, and it was, I'm losing it now. His choice to see things differently. Yeah. He was, clearly, if you read the book, he was pretty rare. Not everybody was seeing things that way. Most people didn't. And so you can say, well, he had some sort of gift to be able to do that, or that was just his temperament that he was born with. But that wasn't his point. The point was everybody has a choice. And some people chose to be bitter, which was the majority, and to kind of despair and quit. And very, very few people chose to survive in a healthy way. Right. Anyhow.
But if I remember correctly, he was also able to help other people change their perspectives as well, right?
Yeah, the ones who were willing to. Because some people thought he was crazy. But he did help a lot of people. In fact, there's another episode in the book where he talks about how just his group that stayed in their hut, I think he was able to convince most of them that, I mean, the short way to put it is they can always act even though they're constantly being acted upon. But it's an internal action, not an external, because externally they had nothing.
Yeah, no control at all.
I mean, they even had their bodies, but even their bodies didn't feel like they belonged to them because they were constantly beaten, constantly sick. He talked about how he had, I forgot the name of the condition, his feet were so swollen he could barely put his shoes on, and this was in the winter. They were constantly working in the snow, and so his shoes would fill up. Because his feet were so swollen, his shoes would fill up with snow. He couldn't put on socks, and sometimes he had to work barefoot, and he had frostbite. Another episode, and not to disturb the listeners, but they brought a 12-year-old boy into a clinic once, and he was, because he had the word doctor in front of his name, and he was service oriented. He had the guards had him working in a clinic more than once. 12-year-old boy comes in with frostbite, who was ordered to stand in attention for several hours in the snow barefoot. The boy's toes had received frostbite, and the Nazi doctor just took some pliers and pulled them all off one at a time. And Dr. Frankl talks about how at first you turn away in horror to see people killed, beaten, tortured, and then over time it's kind of Nick can describe it better than I can. You stop turning away and you kind of become callous to it, numb to it, because it's a coping mechanism. It's a survival instinct. Because if you are constantly taking in the horror of it and the full weight of it, the way you did originally when it was new, you wouldn't survive. Right. And so it's almost like this brain has a unconscious coping mechanism to shut it off. So it's terrible of how I think everybody should read it, even though it's heart-wrenching and horrific. Not to make people suffer, but I think it's a good way to zoom out and get perspective on our own problems, because we all have problems.
For sure. Yeah, and it's a pretty quick read too, isn't it? It's a skinny book.
Yeah, it's not really long.
It's not very long.
The majority of it is his story. So there's like an intro, and then the bulk of it is his multiple stories, and he writes it in a very easy to read format. And then the last couple chapters are his theories and ideas that have come from it, since he's a psychiatrist. It's logotherapy, and I forgot the other one, but yeah, it's more of like, okay, here's the main lessons, and throughout the stories he peppers in lessons,
right?
But then he articulates his new paradigm and therapeutic approach, which is still used by, I think it's the underpinnings of a lot of modern therapeutic approaches today in counseling.
Very cool. So I think we both can recommend that everyone should read this book, but if you had to wrap up the main lesson or your main takeaway, what do you feel like that was?
I guess I alluded to it earlier. I'd say that to me there's a lot of lessons, but one of the most important ones is that you can strip somebody of everything externally. Their clothing, their livelihood, their dignity, their wife or spouse, their children. I don't think he had children beforehand, but their humanity, like everything. You name external things, everything. But you can't strip away somebody's ability to choose how they see, how they respond, or in other words, their attitude.
Yeah.
And that is a really hard thing to hear. I mean, if you talk with people who are having marital problems or parenting problems, it's so easy to be like the way I described in traffic, to feel like your environment is thrusting thoughts and feelings upon you that you have no choice in the matter.
Right.
But I think it's, especially in the Western world, and especially in first world countries in the West, we have so many luxuries and so many freedoms that it just feels natural to say I don't have a choice. I only have choices. I can only have a good day if good things happen to me, and bad day if bad things happen to me. And I can only be happy in my marriage if my spouse is treating me well, and I can only be happy as a parent if my children are making good choices and they're obedient. And the lesson of the book is that's a lie. And we always have our ability to choose. Now, that's half the solution, or I should say half the cure, because as it's been said before, that diagnosis is half the cure. And so if you're people I've tried to help, whether it's couples, parents, or even adolescents or my own children, they tend to think of their problems externally as around them, and that there's nothing they can do about it. And there's maybe some external things they can't do anything about, right?
Right.
So if somebody gets mugged in the street, and they weren't seeking that out, they might not have been able to do anything about that. But what they can choose, even though they were victimized, they can decide how long they stay the victim. How long they identify as a victim, how long they stay bitter for, how they make sense of that mugging.
Right.
And so in a marriage, in fact, can I read you a little example story?
Please.
So this is from a different book, but it's a true story. The names have been changed.
Okay.
So this is about a family. Carol hated Saturdays because her husband yelled at the children when he supervised their household chores. She said this ruined her hopes for a day of cooperative work and loving play. You can already see where Carol's going here. Right? She's controlled by her children and especially her husband. And by the way, just for gender equality's sake, playing the victim can be a man or a woman thing. It's not specific to gender.
For sure.
Okay, so she said this ruined her hopes for a day of cooperative work and loving play. Notice she already said it ruined her hopes. So hope is something that happens on the inside.
Right.
So it's being thrust upon her. And therein lies the danger, and that is the actual lie. So she's already bought into a lie that her hopes are dashed by something outside of her. Story goes on. When he, her husband, would begin to yell, she would roll her eyes and say under her breath, or sometimes a little louder than that, "Here we go again," or "He's ruining everything just like every Saturday." As a victim of this domestic autocrat, the author says, she would often cry, meaning the domestic autocrat being her husband. Then she came to a realization that astonished her. In a flash of understanding, she saw that the Saturday morning problems were not entirely her husband's fault. And this goes into her own words, in Carol's words. I told myself I was trying with all my might to make sure we had a good time together. But in reality, I was looking for hard evidence that he was making it impossible, her husband. That's what surprised me so much. What was most on my mind was, how can I be a good mother when the father acts like this? Ironically, I could tell that my criticism not only hurt him, it seemed to make him even more agitated and impatient. My criticism was contributing to the problem. And the author goes on to say, Carol's story shows clearly how three aspects of people who are betraying the truth within themselves, meaning their ability to choose their attitude and their perspective. And when we go against that, we're betraying ourselves. So Carol's story clearly shows how three aspects of the self-betrayer's conduct always go together. Number one, accusing others. Number two, excusing oneself. And three, displaying oneself as a victim. We can't seek vigilantly for evidence that others are mistreating us, as self-betrayers do, unless we actively put ourselves in the victim's role. Our sense of suffering, or at least of being inconvenienced, clearly proves, at least in our own mind, that our accusation of them is justified. Furthermore, it is precisely by taking this victim role that we are able to excuse ourselves for not being more considerate. It makes no sense, we tell ourselves, to think we could respond more generously when we are being so mistreated. So that story illustrates the point, I think, of Dr. Frankl, is that in that situation, was it nearly as terrible,
right,
or as horrific?
Not even close.
Not even close. But these are everyday circumstances that I and others, and I think a lot of people, and I'm going to say particularly in first world countries and in the West. The reason why I say that is because we tend to be very autonomy focused, but we want autonomy that be outside of us externally. We want people to get out of our way, so I have the freedom to choose external choices. It seems that a lot of Middle Eastern philosophies and practices, and even some Eastern, get this better than the West, that we always have our ability to choose. So Viktor Frankl's book is powerful because everything was taken away from him, but he still could choose how he saw his circumstances. Now, that doesn't mean, I don't want people to listen to this and misunderstand, that doesn't mean he saw the guards as wonderful people, or the capos, who were in some ways worse because they were Jewish prisoners who've been put on authority, and almost like to prove to the Nazi guards how good they were, and almost maybe out of self-preservation, they were even harsher than the Nazi guards, the capos were. So this isn't to say he was excusing what the Nazis did to the Jews at all.
Yeah.
So to choose to see people as people doesn't mean that you're a doormat, that you're giving people a free pass. It simply means you don't let yourself off the hook, and you don't make excuses. Because I think that's speaking of hope, I think that's a pretty hopeless way to live a life. To say, I am controlled by others all the time. And I think that's what ends a lot of marriages and destroys a lot of parent-child relationships, is someone playing themselves the victim. It's not my fault, and I'm waiting for the other person to change so I can change. And you hear that in marital therapy all the time. I'll do my part, therapist, but I got to make sure he or she's going to do their part. And that tells me that person doesn't understand how much choice they have.
Yeah.
Again, it doesn't mean it's excusing the other person's behavior. So this husband who's yelling and being kind of a tyrant on Saturdays, he still needs to change. But this wife is not inviting change because she sees herself as the victim, and she's actually, in some ways, inviting the very thing she's fighting against.
Which is ironic. I think we all do that.
Yeah, we do.
More than we like to admit.
So that's half the cure. The reason why I say is diagnosis is half the cure. Once we start to realize we have a choice, the other half is figuring out, how do I do that?
Right.
How do I start
action
to...
is different.
Yeah, how do I start to realize my attitudes and my attitude and my emotions that stem from those attitudes are my choice, and they're not controlled.
Yeah.
That's I think the harder second half of that. So.
I think it's a pretty freeing thought as well, to like believe that you just are damned by other people's choices. Like,
that's a good word for it.
That's not, like, that's no way to live. That's not hopeful. But to believe that I do have the choice of how I feel and how I react. And I think initial emotions, sometimes you don't really super have control over that, but I do think you can teach yourself to feel differently, like long term. So I just think that's a way more hopeful way to live.
It's hopeful. I agree. In my experience, a lot of people at first don't like it because it's hard to let go of the narrative, the story you've been telling yourself, that everybody else is the problem.
Right.
When you're angry, frustrated, despairing, bitter, hurt. Again, that doesn't mean other people don't have problems.
Yeah.
But as another author has put, is seeing the other person as the problem is the problem. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people don't like that at first, because we like to
want to blame somebody else.
Yeah, I think it's part of human nature to kind of protect ourselves from
fault.
From fault and blame, because that's just hurts our conscience, and maybe we've kind of evolved to do that. Mm-hmm. But from what I've seen, not just in Viktor Frankl's book, but in my personal life and people I know, that hard is not a bad thing. Just because it's hard doesn't mean it's wrong.
Yeah.
That's another false belief. Like, well, I should take the easy route. Well, no, you probably aren't going to grow then. Mm-hmm. The stuff of growth was never made of ease.
Yeah. For the listeners, I served a mission for my church, and something I would always tell the other missionaries is that I was in a leadership position at this point, and I just would tell them that if they're comfortable, they're in a dangerous place. That you need to be uncomfortable. That if you're uncomfortable, you're doing it right. That's where you grow, and that's where you get closer to God. That's where you find success. So I totally agree.
Yeah, people don't go to the gym to be comfortable.
No.
I think that's our bodies are a great metaphor for how our psychology and our character. You have to tear muscle down and break it apart in order for it to grow. Right. So I'm not the only one who feels this way, so I can understand why they resist growth and they resist being uncomfortable, because I prefer that too. But as you said, there's no comfort in the growth zone, and there's no growth in the comfort zone. Amen.
Well, it sounds like you'd recommend this book to everybody. Is there any specific demographic that you think really needs to read the book, or do you really just think it's a book for everybody?
Well, I don't know if children under maybe 16 should read it, just because of how some of the graphic detail.
Read it when they were 11.
Did you read it when you were 11?
I think I was 11, yeah.
Well, that explains a lot.
Yeah.
No, I think if a child, somebody who's under 16 is going to read it, they should read it with their parents, so the parent can help them process it.
Mm-hmm. It was my mom who referred the book to me, so she had read it first.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
I'd say it's for everybody for sure, because again, it's human nature to resist these ideas, but it's very liberating. And as you said earlier, it may not be natural at first. Like our automatic neurological process that we've developed over time that does feel quite automatic, of quick to anger or quick to shame or despair or hurt. We have to untrain that. It's not like a light switch you can just turn on and off. Oh, thank you for that idea, Tim. I'm going to now stop blaming others and excusing myself. That's the first step. The next step is, how can I close the gap between the difficult external stimulus or whatever, like whether it's a marriage or something like that. How can I close the gap between my typical automatic response and what the response internally should be? And I think over time, we can close the distance or that gap, and make it more and more automatic, even if it's a delayed thing. And I think it's really helpful for us to analyze after, let's say you had a really tough day and you experienced some level of road rage or frustration. find a place that you can, and it could be an emotional, mental place, or it could be a physical place, or both, that helps you get outside of that strong negative emotion and have a clear mind, and then practice asking yourself questions. Who was I blaming? Where did I excuse myself? Where did I have a choice? And I think that kind of retroactively or thinking back is really helpful, because if we don't do that, what we'll do is we'll look back on the past and keep our distorted narrative of how we were the victim and the other person was the problem, right?
Yeah.
So I think that if you can't change in the moment, at least we can start doing some maybe after the fact reflection. But and music, we talked about music and boy bands at the beginning. Music can be that place for somebody. So music can be weaponized to keep you hardened, to keep your heart kind of at war, or staying in depression. And I'm not talking about clinical depression, but music can help you stay there. It's almost like in your ally against everybody else, or against that person, your spouse, your child. Or it can help pull you out of it so you can have a clear mind to think, what really happened? Where did I have a choice?
Yeah.
So a quick example, classic teenage example, they're ticked off at their parents and they're angry. So what do they typically do? They listen to angry music.
I've been there.
And the angry music is almost saying, yeah, you should be angry. I get you.
Yeah,
I understand
validating.
you. I'm angry music and I understand
Yeah.
you. And you're right. Your parents are the problem. I remember there was a lot of 80s and 90s music where the people would talk about how angry they were at their parents. And and it feels really, what'd you say, validating?
Yeah,
validating. It can be very validating. Or you're really depressed because your boyfriend or girlfriend broke up with you. It's really easy to listen to sad country music. And I remember being really sad in high school about a girl. And I listened to Neon Moon by Brooks and Dunn, which is a beautiful song. But it was like, yes, I lost my one and only. And I didn't even understand what he was talking about, Neon Moon. He was talking about a neon sign at a bar. Oh. And he's talking about being at a bar, drinking your problems away from or your girl problems.
Tough. It's a tough
but I felt understood.
Yeah, you did.
It did. Now, I think it's good for us to feel understood. On the flip side, we can listen to music that maybe takes us to a place where it was a happy memory, either with the person we have a hard heart towards, or maybe just a happy memory with a mom or a dad, or family vacation, or maybe you look at photos, music, or places you can go mentally. And he does this in the book. He goes to places mentally, and he's trained his mind to do this. That clears his mind up, softens his heart, and now he can ask himself those kind of questions to say, might I be in the wrong? What can I learn from this? Where was I excusing myself? And where was I accusing a person, or,
Yeah.
That's really freeing, and it takes practice, but it's worth it.
Yeah. To go back to your analogy about like our bodies being a good representation of this inside of us, it just made me think too about the idea of like how this isn't really a change we can make in one day, but that it takes repetitions. And I've been going to the gym for a while now, but it's really exciting to see progress. Like, you don't just like show up at the gym day one and do 50 push-ups and 100 pull-ups in one day. Like, it takes time, it takes practice, and it takes you being consistent as well in order to see that progress. So I just like that analogy as well. Like I really do love that our bodies really do show and teach us things about how our minds and our feelings and our emotions and our inside and like our soul like really work. So I just thought that was powerful.
We have to exercise those too, right?
Yeah.
I guess the thought I had while you were saying that is the Pixar WALL-E.
Yeah.
What happens to the human body when everything is provided for it and it never has to exert any effort? They lose bone density. You remember the people that are riding around in their little hover chairs? Yeah, they're huge. They have no muscle mass, morbidly obese, and even their bone density goes down because there's no resistance.
Yeah. And then they're like not even really able to save it. Like, or the people at the end, like they barely saved WALL-E or whatever.
Yeah.
They're like almost like it hurt them to not be able to help the people they were trying to help because their life wasn't hard enough.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think our mind and our hearts have the same pattern.
Yeah.
That if we seek out ease and comfort, that it might mess us up more than we realize.
Yeah. Well, this has been a great conversation. Is there anything else that you want to add before we wrap up?
I guess just be patient with the process.
Mm-hmm.
Having this realization, people can, kind of like your gym analogy, you don't just go in and just crank out a bunch of reps. And if you do, those are the people who get burned out and sore, and then they don't work out for another week because they're so sore because they overdid it.
Yeah.
So be patient with the process and look for incremental, or seek for incremental growth, rather than, like I said, the light switch thing where I could just turn the light on, then I see I have a choice. So my final thought would be patient with the progress, be patient with yourself because you're still going to mess up. Knowing this doesn't preclude you from making mistakes and still playing the victim and still giving up your autonomy or ability to choose inwardly. So that's part of the process of growth. It's going to be messy and it's slow, but it's worth it.
Love that. Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Tim, for being on the podcast. It's been a pleasure talking to you today. Thank you, audience, for joining us on By the Book. We hope that you've enjoyed your time with us. The link to the book on Amazon and Audible will be in the show notes. So let us know in the comments if you end up reading the book and your main takeaways and how you see these principles affect you in your own life. We'll see you next time. This podcast was created to help fulfill class requirements in my Teach Family Life Education class taught by Dr. Daryl Higgins here at BYU Idaho as I work towards a bachelor's degree in marriage and family studies. Thank you.